The MOU is public, all 14 points, and within hours, an Israeli strike on Lebanon has Tehran asking Washington a very pointed question. Whose deal is this exactly? If you're just joining us, the U.S.-Iran track has been running through Qatari-mediated talks in Doha. The interim framework promises uranium dilution, sanctions relief, a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and 60 days to hammer out broader terms. Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been in Qatar for indirect implementation talks. Tehran says there's still no direct meeting with the Americans on the calendar.
This is Iran War Daily. Today the text's finally on paper, so we get to read the Hormuz language ourselves and watch Netanyahu try to torpedo it from a phone call. Let's dig in.
This one's from BBC News.
The full text of an agreement between the U.S. and Iran to end the war has been released by the U.S. A senior U.S. official read the deal, known as a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, to the media, including the BBC. It includes a commitment from both sides to further talks to reach a final agreement over the next 60 days, and also refers to reopening the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. lifting sanctions on Iran.
The Doha track now has public text. A senior U.S. official read all 14 points to reporters, including the BBC. Point 1. Immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, and it names Lebanon explicitly.
Point 6. The U.S. undertakes to develop a plan with at least $300 billion for reconstruction of Iran. So we found the toll booth. It's just pointed the other direction.
Careful. The text says the mechanism gets finalized within 60 days as part of a final deal. So the $300 billion isn't wired anywhere yet. We're looking at an interim framework with a clock. Treaty comes later, if it comes.
And Hormuz reopening is in there, sanctions relief is in there. But the how, the when, the who pays, all of it lives in that 60-day window. The form's finally on paper. The follow-through is a promissory note.
Hacker News, weighing in.
Bibi will fuck it up before the 60 days are up, and we'll be back to square one again. Trump has zero control over him. What a stupid, stupid idiot you folk in the U.S. elected. Twice. Israel's been trying to pull the U.S. into this mess for decades, and no other president was dumb enough to take the bait until Trump.
Point 1 commits everyone to Lebanon's territorial integrity. And there's already an Israeli strike there to reckon with. Can Washington hold Israel to a document Israel didn't sign? That's now the question.
That's the stress test, and it lands inside 60 days, not after. The deal names Lebanon in point 1. The party most likely to break point 1 wasn't in the room.
Here's one from Hacker News.
Point 6. The United States of America undertakes with regional partners to develop a definitive, mutually agreed plan with at least $300 billion, £225 billion, for the reconstruction and economic development of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The mechanism for the implementation of this plan will be finalized as part of a final deal within 60 days. All required licenses, waivers, and permissions needed for the relevant financial transactions will be granted by the United States of America. I have...
This commenter pulled the exact clause I'd flag. Point 6 $300 billion. Licenses and waivers granted by the United States. That's the money line, and it's the one with the most air under it.
You do have to read the whole sentence, which they did. The mechanism will be finalized as part of a final deal within 60 days. Nothing's obligated today. It's an intention with a deadline. The Irish Independent has the details on this one.
A round wrapped, centered on Hormuz. That's the Irish Independent framing. And we just walked through the 14 points, so I can finally stop guessing. The strait is in there. The reopening language is in there.
Right, and that July 2nd Irish Independent piece is the connector. The Doha talks wrapped with Hormuz at the center.
But here's my problem, Sarah. Iran walked into Doha demanding legal recognition of its right to control and charge for that strait. The MOU says reopening. Reopening and recognition of control are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where the next war lives.
That's the honest read. The IRGC has been asserting it manages navigation through Hormuz. The published text accommodates a reopening. It doesn't hand Tehran a toll authority. Those two positions are sitting in the same document, unresolved. Here's Shaheen Demir at Parapolitica.
According to Axios, the American president said he was shocked when his advisors called to brief him about the Israeli raid on Beirut and was furious with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. "It's so bad, I couldn't believe it. 1 hour before we signed the deal. We were supposed to sign the deal this morning, but the Israeli raid on Beirut delayed it," Trump added.
We spent the whole episode on 14 points of paper, and the same day it drops, Israel hits near a hospital in southern Lebanon and demolishes homes. So much for letting the ink dry.
We need to keep two sources separate here. Per Axios, Trump called Netanyahu and said, his words, "What the hell are you doing?" claiming he was shocked by the Beirut raid. Separately, Tehran is challenging U.S. responsibility for what Israel did.
That's the clause nobody wrote into the MOU we just walked through. Iran signed with Washington, and now it's asking whether Washington can actually discipline the guy who wasn't in the room. First stress test, day 1.
And this didn't come out of nowhere. Parapolitica logs Israel hitting Dahia back on June 7th, blamed on Hezbollah rockets. So Netanyahu pushing for an urgent Trump meeting now has a real get-ahead-of-the-story feel to it.
Meanwhile, Tasnim says every flight in and out of western Iran's airports is suspended, and that same order went out before past Iranian missile launches. Diplomacy doesn't usually come with cleared runways.
Here's what Hadar Katzman at the Jerusalem Post is reporting.
So the MOU has been public for about 5 minutes, and the Jerusalem Post says the Pentagon's evaluating moving CENTCOM naval assets into Israel. 60-day negotiating window, and step 1 is repositioning the hardware.
And on the sourcing, this is the Jerusalem Post, framed as a U.S. evaluation after the war. I want to know if that's a Pentagon voice or Israeli defense sourcing, because those carry very different weight.
Either way, you just heard the MOU has Hormuz reopening language in it. If Iran's watching American ships slide toward Israel while it's supposed to be trusting Washington to enforce Strait terms, that's a rough sales pitch.
Right, and posture matters here. Iran was already challenging U.S. responsibility for the Lebanon strike we covered earlier. Moving forces toward Israel gives Tehran a clean argument. Washington is lined up with Israel and can't credibly play mediator or disciplinarian.
If Iran War Daily helps you stay oriented, take a moment to subscribe and leave a review wherever you're listening. It helps other people find the show, and it means a lot to the team. Next, we're watching the MOU's 60-day window for a final U.S.-Iran deal. There's also the 30-day deadline for ending the naval blockade and what that means for Hormuz vessel traffic. And the next indirect talks are expected after Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's funeral processions, with burial due July 9th. Links to every story we covered today are in the show notes, if you want to read further on anything that caught your ear. That's Iran War Daily for today. This is a Lantern podcast.